Maps once guided travelers not just to real places, but toward dreams and monsters. Forgotten cartographers spent lifetimes charting lands that never existed, and their work reveals a hidden history of human ambition. You will discover how these imaginary maps changed the course of exploration and why they mattered more than mere mistakes. Why would someone draw an island that wasn't there? And what did these phantom places say about the fears and hopes of an entire age? By the end, you will understand how fantasy shaped our real world and why the urge to map the unknown still drives us today. What invisible places would you dare to put on a map? Sailors would return from the sea with wild tales, and cartographers had to decide what to believe. Their maps became a collage of observation, ancient authority, and pure speculation. One of the most stunning examples is the Hereford Mappa Mundi, a massive map drawn on calfskin around the year 1300. This was not a tool for a traveler to hold. It was a spiritual diagram for a cathedral, meant to be read as a grand story. Jerusalem sits at the very center of the world, exactly where medieval Christians believed it should be. At the very top, you find the Garden of Eden depicted as a walled island at the edge of the ocean. This was not a navigational error. It was a deliberate placement of faith onto parchment. The map shows strange creatures in distant lands, not because the artist thought they were real, but to symbolize the unknown perils that awaited a soul straying from the path of righteousness. As historian Dr. Evelyn Reed explains, medieval maps were as much about theology as topography. They mapped the soul's journey as much as the body's. Every line drawn was an act of both devotion and deduction. This blending of the spiritual and the terrestrial gave cartographers permission to include lands that fulfilled a prophecy or illustrated a parable. The map was true not because it was accurate, but because it was meaningful. It presented a world ordered by divine will, a comforting concept in an era of immense uncertainty. This foundational approach, where belief could literally shape geography, paved the way for mapmakers to chart far more than just the world they could see. Yet this world of faith was also built on ancient texts, treated with near-sacred authority. A medieval scholar did not just look out the window to understand the world. He opened a book, and the most influential books were centuries old. Ptolemy's Geographia, written in the 2nd century, and the sprawling Natural History by Pliny the Elder were not seen as historical curiosities. They were the cutting edge of science, the unquestioned foundation of all geographical knowledge. When these classical authors described distant, fantastical lands, medieval cartographers eagerly drew them in. The icy island of Thule, said to exist at the very edge of the known world, or the immensely wealthy and mysterious Taprobane, which we know today as Sri Lanka but was then shrouded in exotic legend. These were not considered myths, they were considered facts waiting to be confirmed. This uncritical adoption of ancient accounts demonstrates a powerful truth. For centuries, authority and tradition could completely override empirical observation. The most stunning example of this is Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. Ancient Greek philosophers had theorized that the continents of the north must be balanced by an equally large landmass in the south, otherwise the world would simply tip over. It was a philosophical idea, one based on symmetry and balance, not exploration. Yet for centuries, this idea was taken as geographical fact. Even brilliant and influential mapmakers like Gerardus Mercator included this enormous, fictional continent on his globes well into the 16th century, believing it completed the symmetry of the world. His maps were masterpieces of technical skill, yet they still contained a ghost continent, drawn not from any sailor's log but from a 2,000-year-old theory. The map became less a picture of reality and more a statement of philosophy, a beautiful argument about how the world should be structured rather than how it actually was. This enduring influence of classical legends reminds us that mapping has always been a tense dialogue, a constant negotiation between the weight of past knowledge and the thrilling uncertainty of present discovery. But the most stubborn phantom lands were not vast continents, they were islands. Sprinkled across the parchment seas, these elusive dots of ink promised discovery and lured sailors to their doom for generations. Among the most famous is Hy-Brasil, a circular island said to lie somewhere in the misty Atlantic, west of Ireland. Legends claimed it was a place of immense wealth, cloaked in a perpetual fog that lifted for just one day every 7 years. You can see it clearly on maps from the 14th century onward, a perfect circle waiting for a lucky captain to find it. Then there was St. Brendan's Isle, named for a 6th century monk who reportedly sailed the ocean and discovered a paradise filled with wonders. His legendary voyage was a cornerstone of medieval lore, and mapmakers dutifully included his heavenly island discovery for centuries. Explorers from Christopher Columbus to countless others kept an eye out for it, a testament to how a good story could stubbornly outweigh mounting evidence. And we cannot forget Friesland, a sizable island that appeared near Iceland on numerous respected maps throughout the 1500s and 1600s. It was likely a case of mistaken identity, perhaps a misreading of the Faroe Islands or the southern coast of Iceland seen through a storm. Yet its persistence hints at something more deliberate. In an age of intense colonial competition, having a new island on your map, even a dubious one, could be a powerful claim to territory and royal funding. So why did these non-existent places cling to maps for so long? The reasons are as murky and fascinating as a sea fog. Sometimes it was a simple case of a sailor misidentifying a cloud bank on the horizon as a distant shore. Other times it was a trick of the light, a mirage that made a real island appear in the wrong location, which was then dutifully recorded as a new discovery. But most often it was the irresistible power of the story. A tale of a blessed isle or a city of gold was far more compelling than a blank space on a chart. These phantom islands were more than just mistakes. They were symbols. They represented the burning hope for a shortcut to riches, a divine paradise, or simply the next great discovery. They gave explorers a tangible goal in a terrifyingly vast and empty ocean. Their eventual erasure from the world map was not just a correction of fact, but the quiet end of 1,000 beautiful dreams. This constant push and pull created a profound dilemma for the mapmaker. A beautifully illustrated map filled with strange beasts and phantom coastlines was a work of art, a declaration of a patron's intellectual reach and worldly curiosity. But a ship's captain needed a chart he could trust with his life and his cargo. This was the cartographer's impossible choice, a daily negotiation between the demands of accuracy and the allure of imagination. Wealthy patrons, kings, and noblemen paid for these lavish creations. They were not buying a simple tool, they were purchasing prestige. A map that showed the latest mythical isle or a vast southern continent suggested that its owner possessed secret knowledge, that his influence and understanding stretched into the unknown. To leave off a place like Hy-Brasil or St. Brendan's Isle was not just an act of honesty. It could be seen as a sign of ignorance, a failure to acknowledge the great legends everyone knew. So the cartographer often found himself drawing coastlines he knew were suspect, simply because their absence would make his work, and by extension his patron, seem less impressive. Some mapmakers developed a clever solution, a small phrase that has since become legendary itself. When faced with a completely uncharted and terrifying region, they might inscribe the words, "Here be dragons." This was not a literal claim that fire-breathing reptiles lived there. It was a brilliant piece of cartographic shorthand, a way to acknowledge the terrifying unknown while still filling the blank space. It was an admission of ignorance disguised as a warning, a perfect metaphor for the entire practice. These maps were never just guides. They were complex cultural artifacts, woven from equal parts measured observation, respected tradition, and outright fantasy. They tell us less about the shape of the continents and more about the shape of the human mind, its fears, its hopes, and its irresistible desire to fill the empty spaces on the page with something, anything other than nothing. Yet this sacred cartography was never confined to the edges of the map. It was woven into the very fabric of the known world. Beyond the Garden of Eden, another powerful legend demanded a place on parchment, the kingdom of Prester John. This was a story of a mighty Christian king ruling a lost empire of immense wealth and virtue somewhere in the vastness of the East, or perhaps in the heart of Africa. For centuries, his kingdom was drawn and redrawn, a shimmering mirage of hope for a European Christendom that often felt besieged. It was a compelling narrative, a symbol that faithful allies and untold riches were waiting just beyond the horizon. Mapmakers did not just add this kingdom as a footnote. They integrated it, drawing its rivers and cities with the same confident lines used for Paris or Rome. This was not considered a lie. It was an act of faith, a mapping of a spiritual certainty that had not yet been physically confirmed. The Tower of Babel was another constant fixture, often shown standing tall in the regions of Mesopotamia. Its inclusion was a moral lesson, a permanent reminder of divine punishment and human arrogance etched directly onto the landscape. These features transformed a map from a simple guide into a visual sermon. A person could trace the routes of apostles, see the locations of miracles, and understand their own place in a cosmic story that stretched from creation to apocalypse. The map did not just show you where you were, it showed you why you were there and whose divine plan you were a part of. This deep interconnection of faith and geography meant that when explorers finally did reach new continents, they did so with a Bible in one hand and a map filled with expectation in the other. They weren't just discovering new land, they were looking for the lost tribes of Israel, for the gates of Eden, for the kingdom of Prester John. The map had taught them what to expect of the world, and for a very long time they fully expected to find it. But the ink used to draw these maps was often mixed with gold dust. Beyond the powerful forces of faith and ancient authority, there was another, more worldly engine driving the creation of phantom geography, cold, hard cash. The promise of undiscovered riches could open the coffers of kings and lure investors to fund incredibly risky voyages. A cartographer who drew a new island or a wealthy kingdom was not just making art, he was creating an advertisement, a speculative prospectus designed to inspire action and attract funding. Consider the legendary Isle of Antillia, a phantom that haunted Atlantic charts for centuries. It was often drawn as a large, rectangular island, and the story went that it was a refuge for 7 Christian bishops fleeing the Muslim conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. They had, the tale claimed, built 7 magnificent cities, each overflowing with gold and silver. This was not just a spiritual parable, it was a tangible goal. The possibility of finding Antillia and its 7 cities of gold became a powerful motivator for Spanish and Portuguese explorers, pushing them further into the unknown ocean. It offered a clear return on a very dangerous investment. Then there is the most famous economic mirage of all, El Dorado, the Gilded One. What began as a rumor of a tribal chief who covered his body in gold dust evolved into a legend of an entire city made of gold, hidden somewhere in the unmapped jungles of South America. This fantasy was so potent, so financially seductive, that it refused to die. Expedition after expedition was launched, funded by hopeful crowns and bankrupt nobles. Mapmakers, eager to please their patrons or to sell their latest charts, would carefully include hints of its possible location, drawing elaborate mountain ranges and vast lakes where this city of untold wealth might be found. These were not innocent decorations, they were hooks baited with the promise of unimaginable riches. The consequences of this cartographic sales pitch were devastatingly real. Countless lives were lost in the search for these phantom prizes. Fortunes were squandered on expeditions that found only disease, hardship, and hostile terrain. Entire colonial efforts were redirected based on a rumor sketched onto a map. This practice reveals a darker side to the art of mapmaking. It became a tool for manipulation, a way to blur the line between hopeful speculation and deliberate deception in the ruthless pursuit of commercial and colonial power. A map could be a seductive lie, and many were willing to believe it if it meant a chance at a golden future. Even in our modern age of satellites and digital charts, the Phantom Island refused to vanish. Off the coast of Australia, near New Caledonia, a speck of land known as Sandy Island persisted on world maps for over a century. It was first noted by a British whaling ship around 1876, a dark shape on the horizon logged in a captain's journal. For decades, that single, unverified entry was copied from one map to the next, a ghost born from a sailor's possible mirage or a simple misreading of the waves. It gained the weight of authority simply by being repeated, its existence confirmed not by evidence, but by its presence on other respected charts. Scientists on a research voyage in 2012 decided to finally settle the matter. They sailed to the precise coordinates where the island was supposed to rise from the South Pacific. Their instruments detected nothing but deep ocean water beneath their hull. Where the map promised land, there was only empty sea stretching down for over 1,000 meters. Satellite imagery confirmed the truth. The island had never been there at all. The world's mapping agencies, from National Geographic to Google, had to perform a strange kind of digital exorcism, deleting a place that had stubbornly existed only on paper. Sandy Island was not a myth of gold or paradise. It was a clerical error that snowballed into a global fact, proving that the cartographic tradition of trusting old sources over new evidence did not end with the age of exploration. It simply evolved. The impulse to avoid blank spaces is so powerful that we would rather copy a mistake than leave a void. This tiny, non-existent island is a perfect modern echo of a very ancient practice. It shows us that every map is still a story, a layer of decisions and inherited beliefs, and sometimes the story is wrong. A blank space on a map is an irresistible invitation to the human mind. These phantom islands and ghost continents were more than decorative flourishes or simple errors. They served a profound psychological purpose, soothing a deep and ancient anxiety. For a society that believed in sea monsters and the edge of the world, a vast, empty ocean was not just unknown, it was terrifying. By drawing in an island, even a fictional one, a cartographer was performing a magical act of control. He was transforming a formless, frightening void into a defined place with a name and a story. He was literally making the unknown knowable, replacing fear with a point on a chart that could, in theory, be visited and conquered. This act of creation provided a crucial sense of order and comprehension in a world that was mostly mystery, but these maps did more than just calm fears. They also fed our deepest hopes. They were promises rendered in ink. A sailor setting out into that terrifying emptiness could cling to the idea of Hy-Brasil, a paradise that would reveal itself if he were just brave enough. An investor funding a voyage could dream of the 7 cities of gold, a reward worth any risk. These phantom places were the ultimate carrots on a stick, fueling the very spirit of discovery by offering tangible goals in a formless sea. The cartographer was therefore a master psychologist and a storyteller. His pen was not just drawing coastlines, it was navigating the complex geography of human desire, charting a course between our fear of the void and our boundless hunger for what might lie within it. This is why these lands persisted long after they should have vanished from the charts. Even as the world became more familiar, people still craved that sense of mystery and wonder. The maps that included them were not failures of accuracy. They were triumphant expressions of the human condition, proving that we would always rather imagine a monster in the details than be left staring into a perfect and perfectly empty unknown. The tools of a medieval mapmaker were nothing like those of today. They had no satellites, no aerial photography, and no way to measure longitude with any real accuracy. Their world was built from fragments of information, painstakingly stitched together with a mix of skill and guesswork. One of their most important tools was the Portolan chart, a navigational map used by sailors. These charts were marvels of practical design, covered in a spiderweb of room lines that radiated from central wind roses. A captain could use these lines to plot a straight course from one port to another, but the system had a critical flaw. It was brilliant for navigating between known points along the coast, but it told you absolutely nothing about what lay in the empty spaces between those lines or far out in the open ocean. The chart recorded the path of a journey, not the true shape of the land. For information about the interior of continents or distant seas, the cartographer had to turn to far less reliable sources. They consulted itineraries from travelers, which were lists of stopping points and the distances between them. They gathered oral accounts from sailors and merchants, tales that grew grander with each telling across a tavern table. These stories were then translated into lines on parchment, a scarce and expensive material itself. Every map was copied by hand, a long and laborious process. If one mapmaker drew a speculative island in a blank space, the next copyist was likely to include it too, his pen preserving a mistake and granting it the appearance of established fact. With no way to easily verify these claims, error became entrenched as tradition. To deal with this uncertainty, cartographers developed a visual shorthand. A sea serpent coiled in the waves might indicate treacherous currents or simply that no one knew what was there. An ornate drawing of a castle in a foreign land did not necessarily mean a specific palace existed. It signaled a region of power or wealth. These illustrations were not mere decoration. They were an honest admission of the limits of knowledge, a way to blend art with geography and use symbolism to convey what precise measurement could not. The entire craft was an act of interpretation, a constant balancing of scarce facts with the immense pressure to create a complete picture of the world. In the silence left by a lack of data, imagination was always waiting to speak. Across the Mediterranean, a different cartographic tradition was flourishing, one built on a foundation of mathematical precision and cross-cultural exchange. While European monks drew Mundi for cathedrals, Islamic scholars in centers like Baghdad and Cordoba were advancing the science of geography with stunning sophistication. They preserved and expanded upon the works of Greek thinkers like Ptolemy, translating his texts and then improving his calculations with their own meticulous observations. Their maps were often oriented with south at the top, a perspective that immediately tells us their world view was distinct. They saw their craft not just as a spiritual exercise, but as a rigorous scientific discipline, one that demanded accuracy in measurement and a respect for empirical data gathered from travelers and traders spanning from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. The greatest example of this fusion is the work of the geographer Hy-Brasil. In the 12th century, he was commissioned by the Norman king Roger II of Sicily, a Christian ruler with a deep appetite for Islamic learning, to create the most accurate world map ever known. For 15 years, Hy-Brasil and his team synthesized everything they could gather. They interviewed navigators, studied existing maps, and compiled travelogues from across the known world. The result was the Tabula Rogeriana, a massive silver planisphere, and an accompanying book of geography that was unprecedented in its detail and scope. It depicted the world with a clarity that European maps would not match for centuries. Yet, even this masterpiece of science contained its own phantom. Out in the Atlantic Ocean, Hy-Brasil drew the mysterious Green Island. He described it as a place where sailors from Lisbon were said to have landed, finding it uninhabited but with lush vegetation and ruins suggesting a prior civilization. Was it a misheard account of the Azores or Madeira, a legend borrowed from Arab sailors, or pure speculation to avoid an empty sea? Its presence on such a scientific map proves that even the most rigorous minds were not immune to the allure of the unknown. Islamic cartographers handled these unknowns differently. Instead of drawing monsters, they might inscribe a blank area with a phrase like the land of the blacks or the desert of the demons, not as a literal statement, but as a philosophical acknowledgement of terra incognita. These labels were often more cultural or environmental than purely mythical. This incredible work did not stay isolated. When the Tabula Rogeriana and other Islamic maps reached Europe, they ignited the minds of Renaissance scholars. They provided crucial corrections to the shape of Africa and Asia, but they also imported new legends and reinforced old ones, like the Mountains of the Moon, the fabled source of the Nile. The Phantom Islands and speculative geography of the Arab world were seamlessly woven into the new European atlases, proving that the hunger to map the imaginary was a truly human impulse, one that crossed every border and belonged to every culture. Columbus carried with him a world sketched from ancient texts and hopeful rumors. He was convinced that the island of Antalya lay just beyond the Azores, a stepping stone to the far wealthier Cipangu, the name he knew for Japan. When his ships finally made landfall in the Caribbean, he was not confused, he was certain. He believed he had reached the outer islands of Asia, precisely where his maps told him they should be. This cartographic fantasy directly shaped the course of history, leading to the European colonization of the Americas under a complete geographical misconception. The Phantom Islands on his charts did not just guide him, they blinded him to the reality of an entirely new continent. Decades later, the same relentless pursuit of a legend drove explorers south. The enduring myth of Terra Australis incognita, that vast balancing continent, refused to die. It was this ghost that sent Captain James Cook on his first monumental voyage in 1768. The Admiralty gave him secret orders to find this legendary southern land and claim its riches for Britain. He circumnavigated the globe, meticulously mapping coastlines and proving that no such massive continent existed in the southern Pacific. He did not find the mythical Terra Australis, but his journey irrevocably expanded European knowledge of the world, including the detailed charting of New Zealand and the eastern coast of Australia. In a final, ironic twist, that smaller, real landmass would eventually inherit the name Australia, a permanent echo of the phantom it replaced. This is the dual legacy of the imaginary map. It could lead to triumph or tragedy, often both at once. The same chart that inspired a voyage of discovery could also lead it into an ice field or a dead end, wasting fortunes and lives in pursuit of a mirage. Yet that same powerful lure, the desire to find what was drawn, was responsible for filling in the very blank spaces it had created. The greatest discoveries were often glorious accidents, the unintended consequences of a beautiful, persuasive lie. The monsters in the water were not just for show. When a cartographer drew a leviathan coiling around a ship, he was encoding a vital warning. That area of the sea was treacherous, perhaps plagued by unpredictable whirlpools, hidden rocks, or violent storms that had wrecked other vessels. The beast was a symbol, a universal language understood by any sailor who dared to read the chart. In the same way, a calm sea dotted with dolphins and flying fish might signal a safe and prosperous trading route. The artwork was a sophisticated code, a way to convey critical information that pure geography could not. In the empty spaces between continents, the mapmaker's brush took over where his measurements failed. Elaborate cartouches, those beautifully illustrated boxes holding the map's title, often told their own story. A cartouche adorned with images of gold coins and jewels framing the name of a distant region was not a neutral label. It was a deliberate hint, a suggestion to the map's wealthy patron that this land was rumored to hold untold wealth, a nudge for further exploration and investment. These artistic choices were a cartographer's clever solution to an impossible problem. How do you map what you do not know? You fill the void not with a lie, but with a story. You use art to communicate the feeling of a place, its dangers and its promises, when its exact coordinates remain a mystery. The stunning beauty of these creations, with their gilded edges and vivid colors, often made them more prized as objects of art than as tools of navigation. A king would display a lavishly decorated map to showcase his worldliness and power, not to plan a journey. This is why we still cherish them today, long after their practical use has faded. They are not failed science, they are masterful blends of data and dreams, reminding us that every map is a story waiting to be read, not just a set of directions to be followed. But the sea monsters and phantom isles could not survive the march of precision. A quiet revolution began not with a grand voyage, but in the workshop with the delicate crafting of a new instrument, the marine chronometer. For the first time, a ship's captain could calculate his exact longitude at sea, transforming navigation from an art of educated guesswork into a science of measurable certainty. This single device, paired with the sextant for latitude, meant a vessel could now fix its position on the globe with stunning accuracy. The ocean was no longer a formless void where imagination could run wild. It became a grid of calculable coordinates, and one by one, the old myths failed to find their place upon it. Systematic surveys replaced speculative sketches. National mapping agencies arose, dedicated not to storytelling but to the methodical, unglamorous work of measurement. The beautiful, hand-painted maps of the past gave way to the mass-printed atlases of cartographers like Abraham Ortelius and the Bliu family. Their works were celebrated for their empirical accuracy, their authority built on a new foundation of verified observation and peer review. A blank space on their maps no longer screamed for a dragon to fill it. It now simply stated, unexplored, a temporary admission of ignorance that science was expected to eventually cure. This was a profound shift in the human psyche. The world was slowly being stripped of its magic, not out of malice, but out of a new conviction that everything could and should be known through reason and evidence. The cosmos, once a tapestry of divine wonders and lurking perils, was being reimagined as a vast but ultimately rational machine. The map was no longer a moral lesson or a royal advertisement. It was becoming a technical document, And yet, the old ways clung on with surprising tenacity. In the remote corners of the Arctic, or deep within the unmapped interior of Africa, cartographers might still pencil in a fabled mountain range or a lost city, hedging their bets between the new standards and the old stories. The myth of a navigable northwest passage through North America persisted on maps for centuries, a dangerous fantasy that lured many to their icy doom long after it should have been erased. The transition was not a clean break, but a slow, reluctant retreat. The human hunger for mystery, however, refused to be extinguished by reason. When it could no longer live on the map, it simply found a new home. The epic fantasies of J.R.R. Tolkien, with their meticulously mapped Middle-earth, are direct descendants of this tradition. Modern conspiracy theories about Atlantis or hidden civilizations are the phantom islands of the digital age, proof that we still desperately want the world to be stranger and more wonderful than it appears. The decline of mythical mapping was not the death of imagination. It was merely its evolution, a migration from the parchment of the cartographer to the page of the novelist and the screen of the dreamer. Even our satellites can be seduced by a good story. While digital maps promise perfect accuracy, they have become a new canvas for the same old human impulses. Google Earth allows anyone to zoom in on the most remote corners of the planet, yet phantom islands still emerge from errors in seafloor data or glitches in satellite imagery, their digital existence briefly tantalizing online explorers before being quietly patched away. More deliberately, viral hoaxes about lost continents or hidden pyramids can spread across the globe in hours, drawn not with ink but with pixels and clever Photoshop work, proving that the desire to believe in hidden wonders is as powerful as ever. Yet these new technologies are also solving ancient mysteries. Historians now use LiDAR, a laser scanning technology that can see through dense jungle canopy, to re-examine the landscapes described in old tales. What was once dismissed as a myth, like the Golden City of El Dorado, is sometimes revealed to be a misinterpretation of a very real and very lost cultural center. A legend of a sunken land might be based on the memory of a coastline dramatically changed by rising sea levels thousands of years ago. The myth was not a pure invention, but a distorted echo of a geological truth, passed down through generations until it was recorded on a map. We are now in a unique position, using the most advanced tools ever created to finally test the claims of the most ancient maps. This digital archaeology is not just correcting the record, it is teaching us to listen more carefully to the stories our ancestors told. They were not always mapping fantasy, sometimes they were mapping a reality they could not fully understand, preserving a memory in the only way they knew how. The algorithms that power our digital maps continue this tradition in a new form. They fill in gaps with predictive data and statistical models, making educated guesses about the names of businesses or the best routes to take. This is our version of Here Be Dragons, a sophisticated, automated form of speculation that shapes our view of the world. The dialogue between fact and fiction is far from over. It has simply upgraded its operating system. A map was never an innocent object. It was a political instrument, a declaration of ownership carved onto parchment long before a flag was ever planted in the soil. When a European cartographer drew the kingdom of Prester John in the heart of Africa, or sketched the Isle of Antillia in the Atlantic, he was not just telling a story. He was staking a claim. These phantom geographies created a pretext for exploration and ultimately for conquest. The mythical Christian kingdom justified intrusion into foreign lands under the guise of finding a lost ally. The City of Gold provided a moral cover for exploitation, framing greed as a quest for a legendary prize. The consequences for the indigenous peoples who already inhabited these so-called empty or fantastical lands were devastatingly real. Their very existence was erased by the map, their homes and cultures overwritten by a more compelling European fantasy. This raises a difficult and essential question for us today. When we look at these beautiful historical maps, should we correct their inaccuracies to reflect the truth, or do we preserve them, flaws and all, as honest artifacts of a different time? To alter them would be to whitewash history, to remove the evidence of how power truly worked. But to leave them uncritiqued is to risk perpetuating their harmful narratives. The cartographic historian J.B. Harley argued that maps are never neutral. They are deeply subjective texts, saturated with the intentions and biases of their creators and the societies that commissioned them. They are a form of rhetoric designed to persuade as much as to inform. By acknowledging this, we can begin to read between the lines. We can see a drawing of a sea monster, not just as a charming decoration, but as a deliberate act of othering, a way to define the civilized self against a savage, unknown world. We can recognize the placement of Jerusalem at the center of a Christian map as a declaration of theological supremacy. The ethical weight of the cartographer's pen is something we still grapple with. Our modern digital maps are also filled with choices, from the names we choose to display to the borders we decide to recognize. The legacy of these old myths reminds us that every map is an argument. It is a version of the world, and we must always ask who that version serves and who it has chosen to leave in the shadows. The debunked island of Hy-Brasil still echoes in Irish poetry and song, a spectral presence refusing to be erased by mere facts. This is the curious cultural afterlife of a phantom, where a place proves more powerful in its absence than it ever could have been in reality. The most famous example is, of course, Atlantis. First described by the philosopher Plato as a moral parable about a proud civilization sunk beneath the waves, it has since been endlessly resurrected. It appears in everything from serious scientific speculation to blockbuster Disney films, its story reshaped for every generation. The details of its location and downfall change, but its core symbolism remains, a powerful warning about hubris and a lost golden age. These lands are not remembered because they were real. They endure because of what they represent. They are empty vessels waiting to be filled with our own ideals, our longing for a perfect society, a grand adventure, or a complete escape from the modern world. In this way, the medieval cartographers were the original world builders. With a few strokes of their pens, they did not just sketch coastlines. They authored shared myths, creating a collective dream that could be passed down for centuries. That same creative impulse is more alive than ever today, though its canvas has changed. We now find meticulously drawn maps gracing the opening pages of epic fantasy novels, charting every inch of Middle-earth or Westeros. Video games offer vast digital landscapes to explore, from the alien continents of science fiction to the haunted realms of Gothic horror. These fictional geographies satisfy the very same human urge that once filled the Atlantic with phantom islands. They feed our need to venture into the unknown, to lose ourselves in a place where the rules of our world do not apply. The enduring power of these myths tells us something profound. Our desire to imagine beyond the horizon, to map the impossible, is not a historical artifact. It is a permanent and essential part of who we are. Even the most advanced digital map is still a story told by its creators. The choices of what to include, what to name, and how to highlight certain features are never completely neutral. They reflect the priorities, biases, and blind spots of the people and systems that build them. A contemporary cartographer using Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, might feel a world apart from a monk drawing on calfskin, but the core challenge remains strikingly similar. How do you represent an infinitely complex world with a limited set of tools and information? The medieval answer was to blend art with geography, to use symbolism to convey meaning. Our modern answer is data, vast oceans of it processed by algorithms, but data is not objective truth. It is a collection of points selected and interpreted by humans. A map showing economic activity might light up a city center while rendering a sprawling rural area as a dark void, not because nothing is happening there, but because the chosen metrics cannot capture its value. This is our version of the cartouch adorned with gold coins, subtly directing the viewer's attention and shaping their perception of what matters. The blank spaces on our maps are no longer physical terra incognita. They are data deserts, regions where information is scarce or unreliable. And just like the old cartographers, we feel a powerful urge to fill them in. Predictive algorithms and interpolation tools make educated guesses, creating smooth, colorful gradients over these gaps. This is our informed inference, our best guess based on the patterns we know. But the line between that and pure imagination can be dangerously thin. One unchecked user-generated edit on an open-source map can spawn a modern phantom island, copied and spread by automated systems until it gains the appearance of fact. The democratization of mapping is a wonderful thing, putting powerful tools in the hands of communities to tell their own stories. But it also means the responsibility for vigilance is now shared by everyone. The history of these phantom lands is ultimately a lesson in humility. It reminds us that every map is a product of its time, a snapshot of our best understanding layered with our deepest hopes and fears. The quest is not for a perfect final map because such a thing can never exist. The world is always changing, and our understanding of it is always evolving. The goal, instead, is to approach our craft with both ambition and ethical care, to strive for accuracy while acknowledging the stories we are inevitably telling. We must learn to sit with the empty spaces, to resist the temptation to draw a dragon just because we are afraid of the dark. The true beauty of a map lies not in its completeness, but in its honest attempt to guide us through a world that will always hold more wonder than we can ever chart. This tension between the measurable and the imagined did not end with the Age of Sail. It merely found new frontiers. Look up at the night sky, and you see a modern echo of the medieval mapmaker's challenge. Astrophysicists chart the cosmos, but their maps are filled with theoretical constructs like dark matter and dark energy, invisible forces that we cannot see or directly measure, but whose gravitational influence we can clearly observe. We map them not because we have a photograph, but because the universe makes no sense without them. They are the cosmological equivalent of Terra Australis, a necessary landmass to balance the books of physics. In geology, models of ancient supercontinents like Pangaea are painstakingly reassembled from fossil records and magnetic anomalies in rock. These maps of a world that vanished millions of years ago are acts of profound imagination, yet they are rigorously grounded in evidence and tested against countless data points. The key evolution is the framework. Modern speculation is a scaffold built around a core of observable fact, constantly stress-tested by peer review and the scientific method. A medieval cartographer might include a phantom island based on a single sailor's tale repeated in 3 different books. A modern cosmologist proposes dark matter only after galaxies refuse to spin according to the known laws of physics. The standards of proof have transformed, but the fundamental human impulse has not. We are still taking the fragments we can see and using them to draw a coherent picture of the vastness we cannot. We still hate the blank space, whether it is on a parchment chart or in a theoretical model of the universe. This enduring interplay proves that mapping is not a cold, robotic science. It is, and always has been, a deeply human endeavor. It is our attempt to weave a story from the threads of observation and intuition, to use creativity as a compass for navigating the very boundaries of knowledge itself. A phantom island could become the very soul of a nation. These cartographic myths did more than lure explorers. They wove themselves into the cultural fabric of countries, providing a powerful narrative of origin and destiny. For Ireland, the spectral Hy-Brasil was not merely a navigational error. It evolved into a potent symbol of a lost Gaelic golden age, a paradise just out of reach beyond the western waves, a poignant emblem of resilience and cultural identity that found its way into poetry, song, and folklore. It was a dream that belonged uniquely to them. Far to the north, Scandinavian nations invoked the classical myth of Thule. This icy land, mentioned by ancient Greek explorers, was claimed as their own, a legendary namesake used to assert historical precedence and sovereignty over the remote Arctic territories they sought to control. The story, drawn from an old book, became a tool for modern political claims, but perhaps the most profound example is the ghost continent itself, Terra Australis. Even after it was proven false, its legacy clung to the real landmass we now call Australia. Early European settlers arrived on its shores with the idea that they were inhabiting the edge of a vast, mysterious southern world. This perception, born from a 2,000-year-old theory, fundamentally shaped the budding Australian identity, fostering a sense of being a frontier society on the perimeter of the known world, confronting an immense and ancient interior. These stories were never just tales, they were foundational. A nation could point to a mythical land on a map and say, "This is where we came from," or "This is our destiny," weaving a collective memory from a shared fantasy. This ideological power provided a justification for expansion into new territories, or equally, a rallying cry for resistance against foreign influence. The cartographer's pen, in sketching these phantom shores, was inadvertently drafting the first lines of a national epic, proving that the most enduring borders are often not those drawn by surveyors, but those etched by the stories we choose to believe. Their pens were instruments of both precision and profound imagination. We must remember that the medieval mapmaker was first and foremost an artist, a visionary tasked with translating the entire known cosmos onto a single, finite surface. Consider the monk Fra Mauro, working in the quiet of his Venetian monastery around the year 1450. He did not simply copy from older texts. He gathered reports from Arab traders, consulted with travelers returning from the East, and synthesized this flood of new information into a breathtaking circular map of the world. His masterpiece was a fusion of European and Asian knowledge, a bold attempt to reconcile first-hand accounts with the weight of ancient authority. He even dared to question the existence of the biblical earthly paradise, writing directly on his map that the Garden of Eden might not be a physical place one could ever sail to. This was a radical act of both artistic and intellectual courage. These cartographers were the original data visualizers. They faced the same problem we do today: how to take vast, complex, and often conflicting information and present it in a way that is not only accurate but meaningful. Their solution was to weave it all into a single, cohesive image. A swirling ocean might be rendered with intricate patterns to convey its mystery. A mountain range could be drawn as a series of delicate, overlapping curves, suggesting both its physical presence and its role as a symbolic barrier. Every color choice, every decorative flourish was a deliberate communication. The crimson ink used for a king's domain, the gold leaf highlighting a sacred city, these were not mere decorations. They were a visual language, a way to layer theology, politics, and cosmology onto the geography. To see these works as failed science is to miss the point entirely. They are masterpieces of design where every line carries the weight of a worldview. They challenge our modern separation of art and information, reminding us that the most powerful maps are those that speak not just to the mind, but directly to the human spirit. The quiet scriptorium of a convent held its own kind of cartographic genius. While history remembers the names of monks and scholars, the hands of women also shaped these visions of the world, often from the shadows. A noblewoman like Elena of Aquitaine did not draw the coastlines herself, but her patronage and political influence during the Crusades funded the creation of maps that guided armies and shaped diplomatic strategy. Her court became a nexus for geographical knowledge, blending stories from returning knights with older texts. Within convent walls, nuns with meticulous skill and deep theological understanding illuminated maps for devotional use. Their work was not about navigation but spiritual wayfinding. They painted the Garden of Eden or the routes of pilgrimage with a reverence that was both artistic and scholarly. These contributions are harder to find in the records, often credited anonymously to a workshop or a master's name, but their absence from the headlines does not mean they were absent from the craft. Imagine how a map might have differed if a nun's perspective was central to its design. Would the mythical lands have been portrayed not as realms of gold and monsters, but as places of spiritual refuge or communal harmony? The symbols might have shifted from conquest to connection. Recovering these hidden histories does more than just add names to a list. It fundamentally changes our understanding of how a map comes to be. It reveals the process as a collaborative tapestry, woven from countless threads of experience, belief, and skill. It challenges the myth of the lone male genius and replaces it with a more truthful, more complicated picture of communal creation. This is not just about the past, it highlights a timeless principle that diversity in perspective is not a modern ideal, but a practical necessity for creating a map or any tool of understanding that is truly comprehensive. A wider range of voices ensures that fewer stories are left in the margins, that fewer places are prematurely labeled as barren or monstrous simply because they were unknown to a single point of view. The most accurate map of the world is one drawn by the whole world. A sea monster was never just a monster. It was a data point. The evolution of symbols for the unknown on maps is a quiet history of changing human confidence. In the beginning, the unknown was a place of active, terrifying possibility. The phrase "here be dragons" and its accompanying illustrations were not literal beliefs, but a powerful shorthand. They transformed a vast, empty, and terrifying ocean into a defined space, even if that space was filled with peril. It was a way to say, we know nothing beyond this point, and what we do not know may wish you harm. This was an honest, if dramatic, admission. As the age of exploration gave way to the age of enlightenment, the tone of these symbols began to shift. The terrifying sea serpent was replaced by the hazy, unfinished coastline. Cartographers like those working for national surveys would leave borders faint or sketch in mountain ranges with dotted lines. A blank space might be labeled Terra Incognita, unknown land, a phrase that felt more clinical and less fearful. The unknown was no longer a realm of monsters, but a puzzle to be solved, a blank space waiting for the precise line of a surveyor's tool. The question mark itself began to appear on maps, a perfect symbol of the new scientific mindset. It was a humble, direct question posed to the world, an invitation for someone to come along and provide the answer. This was a move away from storytelling and toward a more systematic, evidence-based acknowledgement of ignorance. The goal was no longer to fill the void with a compelling myth, but to clearly mark it for future investigation. By the 19th century, this process became standardized. Map legends began to include specific symbols for uncertain data. Dashed borders might indicate a disputed or poorly defined frontier. A stippled pattern could suggest a coastline that had been sighted but not yet accurately surveyed. This was cartography growing up, developing a formal language to express its own limitations with clarity and precision rather than with folklore and fear. The unknown had been demystified, transformed from a spiritual trial into a technical challenge. The blank spaces on our maps are vanishing, but the human need for them is not. We are simply finding new frontiers to project our myths onto. The deep ocean floor remains one of the last great unknowns on Earth, a realm where we are still discovering creatures that seem like they belong in a medieval bestiary. We map its trenches and seamounts with sonar, but the public imagination quickly fills these dark, cold deserts with legends of lost cities and colossal, hidden beasts. This is the old impulse in a new technological skin. Even more powerfully, we are now building our own mythical geographies from scratch. Virtual reality and augmented reality technologies allow us to craft and navigate entire worlds that never existed. We can don a headset and walk through the meticulously mapped streets of a fictional city, or explore an alien planet with complete sensory immersion. These are the phantom islands of the digital age, and they satisfy the same deep craving for discovery and wonder that once drew sailors toward Hy-Brasil. The canvas has simply grown infinitely larger. The next great expanse for this mythical impulse is above us in the star-dusted black of space. Our probes send back breathtakingly precise data from Mars, yet we cannot help but see faces in its rocks and speculate about ancient civilizations. As we chart the atmospheres of distant exoplanets, we are already weaving new stories about what life might exist there, much like the old cartographers who populated Africa with the monstrous races described by Pliny. The tools have changed, but the heart of the endeavor remains the same. We are still the storytellers, using the best information available to sketch the outlines of the unknown, and then letting our imaginations color inside the lines. This creative drive is a beautiful, essential part of us, but it now carries a weight the medieval mapmaker could never have conceived. A beautifully rendered fantasy world in a game is harmless fun. But a cleverly fabricated map, one that alters a border or invents a crisis, can be weaponized and spread across the globe in seconds, influencing millions. The ethical responsibility of the modern mapmaker, which includes everyone from software engineers to social media users, is greater than ever before. The future of mapping lies in holding these two powerful forces in balance. We must champion the rigorous, evidence-based standards that allow us to navigate the real world safely and justly. And we must also protect and celebrate the creative, imaginative spirit that uses maps not to guide the body, but to liberate the mind. The journey began with a monk drawing Eden on the edge of the world. It continues with us drawing new worlds entirely. The story of these maps is ultimately a story about us. It reveals a truth far more profound than any single coastline, that the human spirit cannot abide a vacuum. When faced with the terrifying emptiness of an uncharted ocean or the silent void of a blank page, we will always choose to imagine. We will draw a dragon, an island, a golden city, because even a frightening story is more comforting than no story at all. These phantom lands were not failures of geography, but triumphs of hope. They were the engines of discovery, the dreams that launched 1,000 ships into the unknown for better and for worse. They remind us that every map is a portrait of its maker's mind, a blend of what was seen, what was believed, and what was desperately wished for. As we now turn our own cartographic gaze to the ocean floor and to the surface of Mars, we are still those same people. We still weave narratives from sparse data, still project our hopes and fears onto the unknown. The challenge we inherit from those forgotten cartographers is to balance that beautiful, essential creativity with a rigorous honesty, to dream with one eye always on the evidence. Their legacy is not just in the coastlines they got wrong, but in the boundless curiosity they got so right. Thank you for exploring these cartographic dreams with me. If this journey through the unknown resonated with you, please share your thoughts below. What mythical land would you dare to put on a map?